Question again, please.
Yes. So the question is there a difference between African and Black culture? If so, why? And how do we as a collective move forward in defining culture?
Yes, there's definitely a difference between Black American culture and African culture. Our brother Claude Anderson, he has a book out now talking about Black history. He looks at it from a socio-political standpoint, and he was saying how it's very important for Black Americans to use the term Black American to describe ourselves, because we have a very unique history. No one in the world has gone through what we have gone through specifically. We have a very unique struggle. We have a very unique sense of victory. No one has done what we've done. So we have to embrace that by calling it what it is, Black American culture, because when we use the term African American, we let other people slither through and get things that we should get. There were different cases where there are white people who were born in Africa can come over here, get citizenship, and get scholarship and grants by claiming to be African American. All right? So we have to embrace Black. See, we got this thing where we don't want to be Black. We want to be mixed, Puerto Rican, Greek, Cape Verdean, we'll claim everything in the family tree. But when the Black thing come up, everybody wants to start acting funny. So we have to embrace Blackness and understand that's part of our culture and that's who we are.
So if we are talking about culture and the difference between African cultures, being many different types of African cultures and Black American culture, I think that we have to define culture first. What do we mean when we say culture? What is culture composed of? Music and food and dance and language and ways of being and walking through the world. So if we're saying that, then of course there's a difference between what is perceived of as continental African culture and Black American culture. We have to make those distinctions, but we also know that so much of what we would identify as Black American culture is informed by African culture. We see it, and that's why we always, at the end of it, while we acknowledge our differences and our ways of being, we always go back to saying, but we are the same people, originally. That serves our greater purpose, when we acknowledge our sameness and we acknowledge our differences in a way that can serve us and be beneficial to us in understanding, respecting our differences. Why is this a very kind of passionate topic for me? Because I am what my friends would identify oftentimes as a Nigerian Black American. So my family, I'm Nigerian, okay? So my family, when I talk about Black issues, specifically being a Nigerian woman who was raised in America, I'm talking largely about the issues that are plaguing what we could identify as Black American issues, possibly. So if we're talking about mass incarceration, if we're talking about police brutality, if we're talking about all of these different phenomena, a lot of times we address that as a Black American issue. So what does my family say? Funmilola always wants to talk about the Black Americans. She always wants to talk about Black American people as if they are our own people, you know? But I'm like, we are. It would serve us to acknowledge our sameness. And then, what do I hear on the Black American side? You know, the Africans think they better than us. Because y'all come over here, y'all just, so y'all just better? Y'all don't want to be Black Americans? What, you all know what I'm talking about. Right. And so, where I sit is right in the middle of that conversation, kind of translating between the two communities and saying, you have more alike than you have than your differences. And it would serve you to function in coalition and engage a contemporary Pan-Africanism, but we would have to respect each other's differences in order to engage in a type of Pan-Africanism. That's what we need to move toward.
Yes,
Just a little bit to add to support what's just said. We also have to think about how that creates a division and how that division has been around for many, many, many years so that we remain disconnected from each other. And we have to be aware that that is a tool.
And so the reason it's very, very important, and the reason that question is such a great question, and it seems to lead into another question you have later about unity, is it seems to me that where you're going is you're saying, how do we unify? How do we unify? And I'm gonna say this to Black Americans. We are, relative to people of color that I see around the world, we are really, really narcissistic, self-centered. We only focus on what's happening in America. We don't want to know what's going on in other countries. All we want to do is sit here. We think the world is no bigger than the United States and Donald Trump and everything else. And I go other places, and everybody up here gets to travel the world on some level, and there's so much respect and admiration they have for you. I go places, it really embarrassed me because I went places and I had supporters in countries I'd never been to that I hadn't thought much about. And I said, Boyce, what is wrong with you? You need to grow up and stop being so focused on what's happening in America. So that was my journey. I realized that there are a lot of people like this. It's the brainwashing. It's what we go through. So I say everybody in here, if you want to very proactively take this to heart, make sure your children have their passport. Send them to other countries. It don't cost much more to go to the Caribbean than it does to go to Detroit. You'll go visit Africa, connect, because that's where your power is. That's where your strength is. That's where your base is. When you're doing business, you should be thinking about doing business globally with black folks all around the world. And then you don't have to go across the street and beg that man for a job. You got connections everywhere. Yeah. So it does benefit us to unify.
So, in the context of African and Black conscious community, if at all possible, when we talk about unity, how do we unify the various different political ideologies and social identities, such as Black Lives Matter representatives, Pan-Africanists, those who are of the divine Black Greek-led organizations, Nation of Islam, those who are Black and queer? How do we go about unifying all these different ideologies to where we actually move forward and progress towards Black liberation? And honestly, we're going to start with Dr. Boyce Watkins again on that one, possibly.
I was hoping you wouldn't call on me, but I'm messing with you. I've struggled with that a lot because the hard part is that everybody who looks like you ain't got your best interests at heart. It's so difficult sometimes because you really do have some black people that are working so hard to harm other black people that you just don't know what to do. You just, and so my fundamental rule had gotten to the point where I said, I'm not really going to attack you unless I feel like you're hurting the people that I care about. But the idea of unifying can be difficult because sometimes, if you get, let's say, properly assimilated black folks who then go where their bread is best buttered, and they say, okay, my master wants me to attack black people, that's how I'm gonna get my bills paid, and they're coming at you, like the Django, how can Django unify with Stephen? It's almost impossible. Django had to shoot him in the ass. There's nothing else he could do other than deal with him. And so sometimes unity, I think, is, unity can be very powerful if you can find that common ground, but you have to understand that sometimes you have enemies both foreign and domestic. And there's sometimes where you just say, I don't know how we can unify because you don't have the best interests of the community at heart when you do what you do.
Wow. I'm 1804, y'all, so all I can think was Magadol just decided. I really am here to learn, so family, just let me have this. I just want to hear from Tariq right now and just listen up. I'm learning too. Thank you.
Y'all can give it a hand. But my brother Boyce made a very good point. And when it comes to these organizations that claim to be black, because don't trip on the name. Some of the blackest names can be funded by those in the dominant society. And usually the dominant society will purposely fund groups with the blackest name, Alkaline Water Hotel organization, all that is white people funding. And when they come around us, we think it's black empowerment. We start getting some stuff done, and all of a sudden they change the direction, talking about, well, what about the gay community? What about the Hispanics? Let's include them. See, that's a very deliberate thing. People will get around us and then change the direction of what we're trying to do. So we should get with people who are funded by those of us in the community and who are very clear. The agenda is black empowerment. It's all about black empowerment, nothing more, nothing less. We got to be all about 100% black empowerment, not black and brown. We need to get off that black and brown stuff, Randy. Because we are the brown people. It's very clear about that. People in the Hispanic community, they don't classify themselves as brown. Most of them, 95% of them classify themselves as white. We better realize that. We'll be talking about black and brown unity, and you got Hispanic cops out here blowing our brains out. All right? So these are just harsh realities. We're in this on our own. Like John Henry Clark said, we have no friends. So you got to look at the person next to you and be about empowerment and friendship with that person. Thank you.
Yes, so some good points have been made here. I think that thinking through this, thinking about the different, because your question is about the different ideologies that exist, right? And so we know that there are black nationalists, we know that there are black Pan-Africans, we know that there are immigrationists like Garvey who are telling us we don't even have any business in this land. So there are different ideologies. We know that we don't all collectively agree on what the end goal is, but we know that there are different ways of thinking about it. And I think that we have to engage all of those different ways of thinking about it. But one of the points that I think that we need to get at is that we cannot even do any type of black collectivity or black unity, or rather, let me reframe that. We cannot talk about unifying or organizing with brown folks. We cannot talk about being in partnership with white allies or any of that such type of behavior until black people get themselves together, right? So how can black people, if black people want to do the work of unifying black people and then we say, but you want to bring brown people into the equation, you want to bring gay people into the equation. The process that we have to understand is that there are some black people that are gay. Maybe folks don't want to hear that, but there are black people that are gay. Do you all hear what I'm saying? So if we say, we're talking about black people, don't bring that woman stuff in here. Don't bring that gay stuff in here. Don't bring that whatever in here. And I'm not saying that's what you're saying, brother. But if we do that, imagine how many black people we've lost in our efforts. Imagine how many black people we have lost in our efforts to engage in a collectivity. We must talk about all of our different complex identities as black people.
Speak.
And when we try to make blackness homogenous, y'all know what I mean when I say homogenous? One, muted, one kind of not complex thing. What white supremacists have tried to do historically is say that black people are not complex. Yes. They are just black. The blacks are this type of way. What black people have always known is that we are complex people, right? And that our complexity and that our conflict within each other is not always and forever an outgrowth of white supremacy. It's because we are an intelligent, complex people. So we have to think about this. We're only addressing black issues. For so long, what has been defined as black issues has been very limited. Y'all hear what I'm saying? Yeah. So we have to engage complexity of blackness in order to do a true collective movement forward. Or else, how many of us are going to work together? Like 13 of us are going to be left. We ain't dealing with those black people. We ain't dealing with broke black people. It's going to be 13 of us left.
We have black immigrants.
Right.
That's a real issue. It's not just affecting Mexicans.
Yeah.
That's a real issue. We have to stop saying that immigration doesn't affect black people, because it definitely does. We have babies out here that are gay, and it's not a post-traumatic slave syndrome symptom. We cannot tell them that. We cannot tell them that you being gay is because of what happened. The brutalization and the perversion of what happened to our people most definitely happened. But there's an area of folks that we have to love on and not say that you are only gay because of that. Because people have been gay prior to us being colonized here. People have been gay forever, and different communities talk about your gender roles differently. It's not fixed. Even in our indigenous cultures, it's not always fixed. And I have to speak truth to power because I have so many students who feel like they should take their life. They should commit suicide. They can't be themselves. They have to silence themselves. We have to lift them up and tell them that they are just as important and not to separate their blackness. We are all up here as different people. You brought us up here because we speak something different, but collectively, this is the power of us.
The thing is, when I talk about black empowerment, that means all black people, because all black people are in the same boat. I don't like to separate black people into any kind of groups. Like our brother Neely Fuller said, we're all on the bottom of the slave ship. So differentiating between a light-skinned person on the bottom of the slave ship and a black person who's gay on the bottom of the slave ship, that's almost irrelevant in the system of white supremacy when you're all being oppressed. What happens when people start talking about black and gay, and we respect our gay brothers and sisters, but what happens to dominant white society, they pick up on that and they start talking this nonsense about, well, being gay is like being black. And they start that garbage. That's the problem that we have. They use us as the poster children to get benefits for them. They always do that. So we have to stop being the poster child for the white supremacists to benefit off of us, and then we're not always the bad. And the same white supremacists talking about being black is the same thing as being gay. You have gay white supremacists out here. You have lesbian cops out here shooting black people, brutalizing black people. During slavery, you had a lot of gay slave owners out there in the slave plantations. You have gay people out here in Hollywood grabbing up on black men. Terry Crews just filed a police report, gay white dude grabbing up on him. So we're still all in the system of white supremacy, and there are gay white supremacists out there.
The issues that we're having when it comes to homosexuality or not, and dividing us all into groups, we need to think of our oppressor as also played a big part of that. He has homogenized milk. What other animal on the planet drinks another animal's milk? 40 times stronger in hormones than any woman's natural breast milk.
Okay, so, you know, what I would say is that what's really disturbing to me about these conversations about these intersectional issues, you know, whether you're talking about, you know, gay rights or feminism or immigration in particular, those issues, we know they affect black people. We know black people need to talk about these issues. At least this black man does and respects that. The problem with that, though, is that I'm tired of black people always taking our cues from white folks. Yeah. If they start talking about gay rights, then suddenly we start talking about gay rights. If immigration suddenly becomes an issue, then suddenly we feel like we got to talk about immigration. And you turn on CNN and you see black people on CNN, and all they're doing is talking about whatever topic the white man told them to talk about that week, using the same damn language, repeating the same damn phrases, the same damn social engineering, the same damn repetitive crap that somebody else just said right before them. I don't like that. That bothers me because we don't have the ability then to set our own agenda. So, look, you know, not too long ago, I had a brother on my podcast, and I got some pushback. Why you got that gay man on your podcast? Why he on there? I said, he's gay? I didn't even know. We didn't talk about that. You know what? We put our labels, those other labels, to the side and realized we were two black men who care about black people. And that's why we were talking. Seriously. Now, if he had come in and he'd come in repeating the same language I see everybody else using on TV and somehow convincing me to be gay or saying it's okay that we emasculate all these black men on television, putting black men, the easiest way to be famous as a black man is to put on a wig and a dress. That's what they want. They don't want real men in the community, and it pisses me off. So, if black people are going to have conversations about, of course we got to talk about what's going on as far as whether it's heterosexuality, homosexuality, all of that. We know that that's there. We should talk about it. Of course we got to talk about the rights of women. I mean, my God, you came from a woman. How could you disrespect a black woman? I never knew this idea of disrespecting black women because that was my royalty in my family. Of course you got to, immigration matters, right? We know this. But when those conversations happen, there's a difference between an authentic black conversation being led by black people versus a so-called black conversation that is really a white conversation in blackface. We should have diversity of opinion. Homogeneity is not a good thing, but you got to show respect, because you got to understand at the end of the day, their goal is to dismantle the black community, dismantle the black family, and castrate the black male, and that's why I reject it.
I got an intro that Boyce, hold on the mic.
Yes, I think some good necessary points have been made. I think that particularly the point about black people being reactionary to whatever white media tells us to respond to is something that we really have to address. And in the very same breath, I can also say that I don't think necessarily that that this was brought up earlier, that specifically black queer communities, black LGBTQI communities are necessarily always just kind of becoming reactionary or being pawns to white queer communities. I think that what we have to do is realize that while we can be used that way, that we can give black people enough credit to say that black people are actually thinking through these things and not always being used as pawns. What does that say about us and our intellectual capacity, that we would imagine that the majority of us are just simply being used as pawns? Now, media is a dangerous tool that can be used, but if we don't look at historically, what do we mean by black people just being reactionary to everything that white people tell us to do? This is a similar type of argument that is made about black women who engage in critical conversations about gender. That the only reason that black women engage critical conversations about gender is because we're taking the cue from white liberals or white women feminists. Let's be clear. Sojourner Truth was talking about gender issues and critiquing what it means to be a woman before any white feminist roamed the earth.
Speak.
Are y'all hearing me? Ain't I a woman? And what she did was she identified that the cultural construct of womanhood does not apply to black women. So what did she say? She said, I'm not even with you, white woman. She said this in front of a bunch of white women at a conference. And she, as a woman that was enslaved, was not even supposed to be speaking. But what did she do? She identified that the concept of womanhood is culturally constructed. Do y'all hear me? Yeah. So, when we argue that black people on the margins, let's say for instance black women, black queer people, whatever it may be, are just simply being reactionary to white supremacy, look at the history of it. We've been talking about this way before white people even got the vocabulary for it. You understand? And so, in that, we have to be very careful about engaging the complexities of this conversation. Lastly, I knew there was one more point. Is there an attack on black masculinity? Y'all think there is? Yes. If that's real, if there's an attack on black masculinity, then we have to define what black masculinity is to begin with. How can we even say that there's an attack on black masculinity when we can't even agree on what black masculinity is supposed to be? People get angry when those with a feminist ideology say that that gender is a social construct. You have black people saying, no, don't adopt all that Eurocentric foolishness. Gender isn't a social construct. There's men, there's women, men have their roles, women have their roles. Tell me, when did that start? Tell me, when did that start? Women and men are both fully intellectually capable human beings. Thus, in a household, for instance, or in a community where there are men and women, those who are good at what they're good at doing take on those roles. But when we say men make the decisions and women listen and children listen too, and that's how it's always been because that's the African way. Let me tell you, I'm African. It's not the African way. You want to talk about critiquing Eurocentrism in black communities. This concept of like this firm, rigid, what masculinity is and what femininity is hella European. Do y'all hear me? That's hella European. So we centrism, but at the same breath say we are an African people, and then say that this is how African men and women are supposed to show up in the world. Real men, real women. We must define what exactly that means. Because if somebody has defined for us what masculinity is supposed to be and what femininity is supposed to be, and anybody that transgresses or exists outside of that then gets called an attack on the community, let us be more critical. Y'all hear me?
Yes.
Be more critical.
Flex is saying I'm struggling with raising my black kids. I might look at the crowd just start putting the black kids, that's all I know, okay, the crowd does the kind of clap it up. All right, so y'all can participate in that as well. Yeah. So, we're going to move to the next question. That was very lively. And I think
That was good.
Y'all believe that one?
The thing is, because the next question is very much connected to this question, we'll start off with you.
I'll just get into the questions since everyone has answers. Has the lack of the stability of the Black family caused the regression of Black and African culture? And what should the values of the Black family consist of moving forward?
This is being good.
That ties in.
That's what I mean.
Yes, so we got to unpack what our beautiful sister said. Because the thing is, when we start misrepresenting and changing the definition of what gender roles should be, then that causes a lot of confusion. With men and women, we're biological creatures, and we have a basic biological role in relationships, and everything else is built from that. But the basic biological role, the woman is usually the nurturer, the male is usually the protector. That's the basic biological role that has helped men and women survive for centuries, okay? When we start trying to mix that up, saying that these roles are not right, we need to mix it up a little bit, all of a sudden we get confusion. We get men out here wearing dresses and anklets and skirts and tolerance. And it has always been an African thing to be a protector. It was an African thing for Black women to nurture. Black women are still the world's nurturers, even in the dominant white society. That's why they would bring Black women into their homes to nurture their children. So that nurturing is who we are. It's not a bad thing. The white supremacist feminists came along saying that that's a bad thing. We need to change the roles up a little bit. But the thing is, they were running game on us because they never got rid of their men. You don't hear white feminists talking about we don't need no man. That's something that they brought to us. We ran with it. And we hear all of this. So we have to be very careful with some of the ideologies that they bring to us, and we shouldn't adopt that ideology.
Okay.
We even have an issue with daddies kissing their sons because of the homophobia, right? Because so many of our males, for example, are emotionally unavailable in romantic relationships because they grow up in societies that don't allow them to express the multitude of emotions that they have. Because again, being a male means that you can only be macho. And if you're not super hard and tough all the time, then you a punk, you soft, you feminine, effeminate. You're a woman. The worst thing a man can be called is a woman.
Thus, great, we understand that men and women are different biologically. Yes, we can agree upon that. When we make those biological distinctions, oftentimes what we're talking about are testosterone and estrogen. Yes?
Yes. Go.
Right?
Go.
Right? Testosterone and estrogen.
Go.
And so oftentimes what we find is that when we think about the ways in which, the way that we understand men and women's roles in society, we're talking about, well, men have testosterone, women have estrogen. But both men and women have testosterone and estrogen. Both men and women have testosterone and estrogen.
Let's go. Let's go.
Y'all hear where I'm going?
Let's go.
Now, if both men and women have testosterone and estrogen, then this means that yes, men have disproportionately higher amounts of testosterone and women have disproportionately higher amounts of estrogen. What we do is that we link estrogen to emotionality. We link testosterone to that which is logical.
Right.
Y'all hear me?
Right.
We link testosterone to that which is logical.
Right.
Then, when we,
People are putting their fist up because they want.
No. Keep going.
Agree, or y'all want me to be quiet?
Don't talk. Let her finish.
She already
It's all about communication, though.
Black kids just signifies black power at this moment.
Oh, I didn't know.
What we're gonna do,
Agree.
Professor Fagbamila, in a minute or so, wrap it up, please. And just let her finish her point.
Sure.
To the next question.
I will continue to say that if we link estrogen to emotionality but testosterone to logic, what are we actually doing? Women have the capacity to be logical and men have the capacity to be emotional. And when we say that men can't be emotional and they're just logical, we do something wrong to our black boys that think that they can't cry and end up committing suicide because masculinity is so rigid.
Go.
And when we say that women are emotional and that they're not logical, they are not intellectually capable of making their own decisions and that they cannot run their own lives because that is men's roles.
Go.
What are you actually talking about?
Go.
You are saying that women don't have the emotional capability or the intellectual capability of running themselves. Let us not do that European work. Let us not do that European work. Oh, lastly, breakdown of the black family is absolutely necessary for us to address. And we also have to say that black women are not asserting that we don't need black men. We know that we need each other, but we know that in order to bring ourselves to the highest expression of our true goodness, we have to be critical of each other from a place of what? Love.
Go.
Love.
Go.
Everyone seems very much so invested and interested in this question and conversation. So, I'm going to say, would you all like us to continue to dive more into this conversation right now?
Yes.
You ask question answer periods at the end. Or would you guys like for us to move on?
No.
Move on? Okay.
I like this topic. Let Tariq
Pass this mic down. My sister was saying that the testosterone and estrogen thing, and it seems like we make it seem like sisters cannot be emotional, they can be this. When we talk about testosterone, we're talking about protection. We're talking about the man being able to protect the family. That's what we're doing with it. And a lot of things that happens in our communities is because there is a lack of protection. There's a lot of children out here being molested by baby mama boyfriends, cousins, uncles, because there's not a male protector in that family. A lot of people come into our communities harming our children because the protection factor isn't there. So when we talk about testosterone, we're talking about that from a biological standpoint where we can protect our communities. So we're not trying to minimize sisters. We know you got testosterone, but you cannot protect the communities like it needs to be protected. So that's something that we have to be very realistic about. So this is why we have to understand the roles that men and women should have in families. That's what I'm saying.
Well, thank you for those very great answers. So we're going to transition to our next question now. And we're going to switch